300 years had passed since the last human ship crossed the border into Concordat space. 300 years since anyone heard a transmission from Earth. 300 years since humanity simply vanished. The galaxy had theories, of course. The most popular was civil war. Humans were always fighting among themselves, everyone knew that. The second theory was plague or environmental collapse. A few optimistic souls believed humanity had transcended somehow, evolved beyond physical form or discovered faster-than-light travel that actually worked. But most species didn't care anymore. Humanity was gone, and that was fine with everyone. Actually, it was better than fine. It was a relief. Ambassador of the Empire remembered the Convergence War. He had been young then, barely past his first century, but he remembered the fear. 5 species, the 5 most powerful civilizations in the galaxy, had united to stop human expansion, and they had barely managed a stalemate. Barely. The humans had been outnumbered 20-1, and they still fought every species to a standstill. Now sat in the Concordat council chambers, listening to the representative complain about trade routes, and he thanked the ancestors that humanity was gone. He had nightmares sometimes, dreams where human warships appeared in the sky above his. In those dreams, he always woke up screaming. But those were just dreams. Humans were gone, dead, extinct. The Terran border worlds were silent tombs, nothing more. Hive commander of the collective didn't believe in ghosts. They were practical creatures and logical. Their hive mind left no room for superstition. When the collective needed resources, they took them. When obstacles appeared, they removed them. It was simple. The mineral-rich systems at the edge of former Terran space represented a significant opportunity. 3 centuries was more than enough time for whatever automated defenses humanity left behind to fail. Besides, the collective had sent survey drones into the area for decades. Nothing ever came back true, but that just meant the defenses were still working. Defenses needed power. Power sources eventually failed. Presented his proposal to the Concordat Council with absolute confidence. The outer Terran marches should be opened for colonization. The resources there could power the Concordat for 1,000 years. And really, who would complain? The humans were gone. Ambassador wanted to object. Something in his gut told him this was a mistake. But he was old now, approaching his 4th century, and the younger ambassadors thought he was paranoid. The vote passed. The collective would establish mining colonies in the outer Terran marches. Went home that night and poured himself a strong drink. He told himself everything would be fine. Humanity was gone. They had to be gone. Because if they weren't, if they had been out there all this time, watching and waiting. He poured himself another drink. The colony fleet entered Terran space 3 months later. 200 ships carrying drones, equipment, and millions of workers in hibernation. They headed for a system the humans had called Threshold, a yellow star with 7 planets and 1 particularly mineral-rich moon. The system was dead, silent. The scanners detected no active power sources, no transmissions, no signs of life. Perfect. They landed on the moon and began setting up the mining operation. They were efficient. Within 2 weeks, they had a functional base. Within a month, they were extracting valuable minerals from deep beneath the surface. Within 2 months, they had a thriving colony of 3 million workers and a defensive fleet of 300 ships. Hive Commander reviewed the reports with satisfaction. This would be the first of many colonies. Soon, the entire Terran marches would belong to the collective. He sent a message back to the requesting approval for expansion into the neighboring systems. Then, on the 73rd day of the colony's existence, something changed. Every screen in the command center went dark. Then they lit up again, displaying the same message in perfect language. The words appeared in their written script, but they also heard it in their minds through the hive link, which should have been impossible. You have 72 hours to evacuate Threshold. This is your only warning. The command center erupted in chaos. Workers scrambled to trace the signal source. It came from everywhere and nowhere. It was in their computers, in their networks, in the hive link itself. Someone or something had penetrated their most secure systems like they weren't even there. Forced himself to remain calm. This was a trick, though perhaps trying to scare them away from valuable resources, or maybe some automated defense system that was more sophisticated than they expected. Either way, the collective did not respond to threats. He ordered the fleet to high alert and sent a message to the Concordat Council. Then he waited. 72 hours passed. Nothing happened. They relaxed. It had been a bluff, nothing more. Some old automated system trying to frighten them away. Primitive and ineffective. Sent a response into the void, his confidence restored. Threshold is now property of the collective. We claim this system in the name of the hive. Your threats are meaningless. 6 hours later, the moon opened up. Not from mining, from within. A massive section of the lunar surface split apart like a flower blooming, and something rose from the depths. The scanners went insane, trying to process what they were seeing. A ship. No, not just a ship. A dreadnought. Human design, marked with symbols the database identified as belonging to the Terran Concordat Navy. The hull was an ancient, covered in micrometeorite impacts and radiation scoring. But the weapons that emerged from its armored flanks were very much alive and powered. The TCNS Vindication had been sleeping in the moon's core for 300 years. Now it woke up. The fleet scrambled to respond. 300 ships moved to engage the single dreadnought. Opened communications, demanding identification, demanding explanation, demanding anything. The Vindication didn't answer with words. It answered with weapons fire. What followed wasn't a battle. Battles required two sides fighting. This was an execution. The human dreadnought moved through the fleet like a predator through prey. Its weapons were terrifyingly precise. Missiles that split into thousands of submunitions. Energy beams that cut through shields like they weren't there. Point defense systems that shot down every torpedo before it got within a kilometer of the hull. Watched in horror as his fleet died. He sent out desperate calls for help, for reinforcements, for anything. But the nearest fleet was 3 weeks away. He didn't have 3 hours. The Vindication disabled the colony's power systems with a single precise strike. Then it systematically destroyed every ship in orbit. Not quickly, methodically. It took its time, as if teaching a lesson. When the last vessel exploded, the dreadnought turned its weapons on the colony itself. But it didn't fire. Instead, another transmission came through. This time it was a voice, human, male, calm and absolutely certain. You have 12 hours to evacuate. We are transmitting landing coordinates for your transport ships. Follow them exactly. Deviate and we will consider it an act of aggression. Leave nothing behind. Take your dead. When you are gone, this colony will be erased from existence. Wanted to refuse. The hive demanded it. But he watched the Vindication hanging in the sky above his colony, and he knew they had no choice. They began evacuating. 12 hours later, the last transport ship lifted off from Threshold. They watched from a safe distance as the Vindication unleashed its weapons on the now empty colony. In 30 minutes, the entire base was reduced to molten slag. The dreadnought carved away the section of moon where the colony had stood, vaporizing any trace that they had ever been there. Then it transmitted one final message, and this time the message was sent not just to the fleeing, but to the entire Concordat Council. Every species with a receiver heard it. Every species with a screen saw the image of the Vindication hanging in space above the ruined moon. Humanity remembers. Humanity returns. Stay out of Terran space. You will not receive another warning. The transmission ended. The Vindication descended back into the moon, and the lunar surface closed over it like nothing had happened. Ambassador stood in his quarters, staring at the message on his screen. His hands were shaking. The drink in his hand spilled onto the floor, but he didn't notice. His worst nightmare had just become real. Humanity wasn't gone. They had been there all along, watching, waiting. And now they had announced their return in the most terrifying way possible. They hadn't just destroyed the fleet. They had demonstrated absolute superiority. 300 ships destroyed by one dreadnought. One ancient dreadnought that had been sleeping in a moon for 3 centuries. If that was what humanity left behind in their border systems, what did they have in their core worlds? What had they been building during 300 years of silence? Picked up his communicator with trembling hands and called an emergency session of the Concordat Council. Every ambassador answered immediately. No one needed to ask why. They had all seen the message. As walked to the council chambers, he passed a viewport showing the night sky. He looked out at the stars and wondered how many of them were being watched by human ships. How many automated defenses were sleeping in dead moons and asteroids, waiting for someone to make a mistake. His nightmares had been real all along. Humanity had never left. They had just been quiet. And now the galaxy would have to face the question everyone had been avoiding for 300 years. What had humanity become in their silence? And why had they finally decided to speak? The Concordat Council met in emergency session 6 hours after the threshold incident. Every major species sent their highest-ranking officials. The chamber, usually a place of diplomatic debate and careful negotiation, felt more like a war room. Everyone was frightened, though they tried to hide it. Hive Commander stood before them, his carapace still from debris during the evacuation. He transmitted his report through the HiveLink translators, and his rage was obvious even through the mechanical voice. 43,000 died at threshold. The human ship gave us 12 hours, but some workers were in deep mines. We couldn't reach them all. They hunted down our fleet like we were insects. They had 300 years of peace, and they spent it building weapons. We must respond. The collective demands vengeance. Ambassador wanted to laugh at the word vengeance, but he was too tired, too scared. Instead, he spoke carefully, knowing his next words might determine whether the galaxy went to war. What we must do is think very carefully before we act. That dreadnought, the Vindication, was 300 years old. 300 years, and it destroyed your entire fleet without taking damage. What do you think humanity's current fleet looks like? A representative, a being of pure energy contained in a crystalline matrix, pulsed with concern. We must attempt communication. Perhaps this was an automated response. Perhaps humanity is dead, and we are dealing with their military AI systems. That voice was not artificial, said an ambassador, her translation device converting her subsonic frequencies into galactic standard. I have studied human communication patterns. That was a living human speaking, one who wanted us to know they were alive. Then we send a diplomatic mission, suggested a young ambassador. We apologize for the incursion into their space. We establish new borders. Surely they will negotiate. Mandibles clicked in anger. They murdered 43,000. This requires a military response. Stood up slowly, his age-worn body protesting. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. I fought in the Convergence War. I was there when 5 species united to stop human expansion. We had superior numbers, superior technology, superior resources. We barely achieved a stalemate. That was 300 years ago. What do you think has changed? The chamber fell silent. Everyone was thinking the same thing, but no one wanted to say it out loud. The representative, a crystalline being who rarely spoke, broke the silence. We assumed humanity destroyed itself. But what if they left to rebuild, to advance, to prepare? Prepare for what? Asked the young ambassador. For us, said quietly. For the day when someone would inevitably cross their borders again. They knew we would. Eventually, someone would get greedy or curious or arrogant, so they set traps. They put sleeping ships in dead moons, and they waited. The pulsed with urgency. We must find out what they want. We must establish contact. I agree, he said, but not with apologies. Humans don't respect weakness. They respect strength and honesty. We should send a fleet, a significant fleet, to their borders, not to attack but to demonstrate that we are still a power worth negotiating with, and we should ask them directly what they want. Was furious. You want to reward their aggression by sending them our military assets. You're insane. No, replied. I'm experienced, and I'm telling you that showing up weak will only make things worse. Humans understand force, but they also understand honor, at least they used to. We need to find out if that's still true. The debate raged for hours. Finally, a compromise was reached. The end would assemble a joint expeditionary fleet. 3,000 ships, the largest military force the Concordat had gathered in 2 centuries. It would be commanded by Ambassador Admiral, with diplomatic training and military experience. The fleet would approach the Terran borders with weapons cold, broadcasting peaceful intentions. If humanity wanted war, 3,000 ships would give them a fight. If humanity wanted peace, 3,000 ships would prove the Concordat was worth talking to. Either way, the galaxy would finally get answers. Voted for the plan but felt sick doing it. 3,000 ships sounded impressive until you remembered that one ancient human dreadnought had destroyed 300. But he kept that thought to himself. The younger ambassadors needed their courage, and math would only terrify them. The fleet assembled over 3 weeks. Cruisers, sleek and elegant, their hulls marked with centuries of proud service. Hive ships, bristling with weapons and swarming with fighter craft. A few vessels joined them, their crystalline forms beautiful and deadly. Even some ships came, their water-filled hulls strange but formidable. Ambassador Admiral stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Eternal Vigilance, and watched the fleet form up around her. She was old for almost 300 years, and she had seen many things, but she had never seen a fleet this large outside of the Convergence War. She remembered that war. Remembered the human ships fighting with desperate creativity, their tactics unpredictable and terrifying. Remembered the relief when the peace was finally signed, when both sides agreed to stop before they destroyed each other completely. She had hoped never to face humanity again. But here she was, commanding a fleet heading into Terran space, hoping the humans would talk instead of shoot. Her second officer, a younger named, approached her station. The fleet is ready, Admiral. All ships report green across the board. Shall I give the order to jump? Looked at the tactical display one more time. 3,000 ships, millions of crew members, the largest military force in the modern galaxy, all heading toward an enemy that had been silent for 300 years. Send a message to all ships, she said. Weapons remain cold unless I personally give the order to arm them. Anyone who fires without authorization will be court-martialed and executed. We are not going to start a war because some nervous gunner gets trigger-happy. Understood. Understood, Admiral. Good, and send a continuous broadcast on all human frequencies. Tell them we are coming in peace, that we seek diplomatic contact, and that we will respect their borders. Send it in every language we know humans spoke. Send it constantly. Looked worried. Admiral, what if they don't respond? What if they just attack? Smiled sadly. Then we'll find out very quickly just how much humanity has changed in 300 years. And if my instincts are correct, we're all going to be very surprised. She took a deep breath and gave the order. All ships, initiate jump. Destination, gateway, former human border station. May the ancestors protect us. 3,000 ships vanished into faster-than-light, heading toward the edge of Terran space. Behind them, the Concordat held its breath. Ahead of them, something waited in the dark. Something that had been preparing for this moment for 3 centuries. The fleet jumped through FTL space for 3 days. It was a strange journey. Usually, military fleets would be tense, crews running drills, commanders shouting orders. But this fleet was quiet. Everyone knew they might be jumping into a battle they couldn't win. Everyone knew they might be jumping to their deaths. Spent the time reviewing everything the Concordat knew about humanity. It wasn't much. The human worlds had gone dark 300 years ago and no one had heard from them since. No trade, no communication, no travelers, nothing. Just silence and those automated defenses that destroyed anyone who got too close. She read reports from the Convergence War, tactical analyses of human behavior. Humans were adaptable, the reports said, dangerously creative. They didn't follow standard military doctrine because they had no respect for tradition. They tried things no sane species would attempt, and sometimes those crazy ideas worked. Fighting humans was like fighting chaos itself. But they were also honorable in their way. They followed their own rules strictly, even when those rules made life harder for them. They valued individual life in a way most hive species found incomprehensible. Every human death mattered to them, which made them both compassionate and absolutely vicious when defending their own. Hope that last part was still true. If humanity still valued honor and rules, there was a chance for peace. If they had become something else during their isolation, something cold and merciless, then this fleet was sailing toward its doom. On the third day, they arrived at Gateway. The station was alive, not just operational but fully powered, its defensive weapons tracking their fleet the moment they dropped out of FTL. The station's sensors swept over them, analyzing every ship, cataloging every weapon, counting every crew member. Could feel it, even though she couldn't see it. They were being measured, evaluated, judged. Then the communication came through. A human voice, female, speaking perfect Galactic, standard with a slight accent that's translator, identified as North American English. Concordat Fleet, this is Gateway Control. You are entering Terran sovereign space. State your intentions. His hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. Gateway Control, this is Ambassador Admiral of the Empire, commanding the Concordat Expeditionary Fleet. We come in peace seeking diplomatic contact with the Terran government. We request permission to speak with your leadership. There was a pause, 5 seconds, 10, 15, counted each one, wondering if the next moment would bring weapons fire. Then the human voice returned, and heard something in it that made her relax slightly. Amusement. Gateway Control to Ambassador Admiral. Your fleet is being scanned. Please maintain current position and keep your weapons offline. Stand by. The next 30 minutes were the longest of his life. The fleet held position, 3,000 ships drifting in space while human sensors examined them. She watched her tactical display, seeing Gateway's weapons tracking her ships with casual precision. The station had enough firepower to destroy her entire fleet, and it was just one station. Finally, the human voice returned. Ambassador Admiral, your request for diplomatic contact is granted. However, we will not bring a fleet of 3,000 warships into our inner systems. You may select a diplomatic delegation of no more than 50 individuals. We will provide transport to Earth. Your fleet will remain here at Gateway under our observation. If your fleet makes any aggressive moves, it will be destroyed. If your diplomatic delegation acts with hostility, it will be neutralized. Do you accept these terms? Wanted to refuse. Leaving her fleet behind, going into human space with only 50 people, trusting humanity to keep her safe, it went against every military instinct she had. But she had come here to establish contact. This was the price. I accept your terms. I will select my delegation and prepare for transport. Acknowledged. A shuttle will arrive at your position in 3 hours. Prepare your delegation. And Ambassador Admiral. Yes. The human voice was warm now, almost friendly. Welcome back to Terran space. It's been a long time. We have a lot to talk about. The communication ended. Sat back in her chair and let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. First contact had been made. Humanity was still human, still capable of talking instead of shooting. But that weapons scan had been incredibly sophisticated. That station was more advanced than anything the Concordat had. And if this was just their border station, what waited in their core systems? Selected her delegation carefully. Herself, high voice to represent the observer and 47 support staff and guards. When the human shuttle arrived, she got her first real look at modern human technology. The shuttle was small, maybe 50 meters long, but it moved with impossible grace. Its hull seemed to shimmer, as if it wasn't entirely solid. When it docked with her flagship, the airlock cycled and the door opened. A human stepped through and's breath caught. The woman was young, maybe 30 in human years, but something about her was different. Her movements were too precise, too fluid. Her eyes seemed to see everything at once. She wore a simple uniform marked with the symbols of the Terran sovereignty, and she smiled like she was greeting old friends. Ambassador Admiral, I'm Captain Sarah. I'll be your pilot and guide for the next few days. If you and your delegation are ready, we should get going. It's a 3-day trip to Earth, and we have a lot to discuss along the way. Had so many questions, but she just nodded. We're ready, Captain. As they boarded the shuttle, noticed the guard's high voice had brought along. Large warriors, heavily armed, meant to protect the delegation. They were the collective's finest soldiers. Captain glanced at them and smiled slightly. Realized with a chill that the captain wasn't worried at all, not even a little, and that meant. The shuttle's door closed behind them, and they accelerated away from the fleet at speeds that should have been impossible. Watched her flagship shrink to a tiny point of light, then vanish as the shuttle jumped to FTL. They were heading into human space now, into the heart of a civilization that had been silent for 300 years. Whatever they found there would change the galaxy forever. Knew it in her bones. She just hoped the change wouldn't involve her entire species becoming extinct. Captain offered her a seat and a drink. Relax, Ambassador. The first day is mostly travel. We'll reach the outer colonies tomorrow and Earth on the 3rd day. Until then, make yourselves comfortable. I'm sure you have questions. Sat down and looked at the human captain. Yes, she had questions, about 1,000 of them. But the first one, the most important one, came out before she could stop it. What happened to you? Where did humanity go for 300 years? Captain's smile widened. We went home, Ambassador. We went home and we changed everything. And now we're back. Let me tell you what we've been doing while you thought we were dead. The shuttle traveled through human space for 3 days. And with every hour that passed, Ambassador Admiral felt her understanding of reality crumble a little more. The first colony they passed was called New Vancouver. It orbited a blue star just inside the Terran border, and it was beautiful in a way that made his chest ache. The planet below was a perfect balance of cities and nature, urban centers that seemed to grow organically from the landscape rather than conquer it. But it was the orbital infrastructure that made her stare. Rings circled the planet, massive structures that caught starlight and converted it to power. Stations the size of small moons hung in space, their purposes unclear but their scale overwhelming. Hundreds of ships moved through the system, each one sleek and advanced, their hulls made of materials couldn't identify. This is one of our newer colonies, Captain said casually. Only 200 years old, population of about 15 billion, mostly concentrated in the coastal cities. Nice place. I grew up on the 3rd continent. 15 billion. Its capital of the empire had a population of 8 billion and was considered crowded. And this was one colony, one newer colony. High voice chittered through the translator. How many colonies does humanity have? Thought for a moment. Active colonies with populations over 1 billion, about 1,000, smaller settlements and research stations, maybe 5,000. We've been busy. The representative went very still. Through the hive link, knew he was reporting these numbers back to the collective. She wondered what the reaction would be. Probably terror. The shuttle continued inward, passing system after system. Each one was developed, populated, defended. The level of technology on display was staggering. Ships moved at speeds that shouldn't be possible. Stations built on scales that physics. And everywhere always, the sense that they were being watched by systems far more advanced than anything the Concordat possessed. Answered their questions patiently, explaining what had happened during humanity's 300-year absence. Her story was hard to believe, but could see the proof all around them. After the Convergence War, we had a choice, said. They were sitting in the shuttle's observation deck, watching a gas giant pass by. Mining platforms floated in its atmosphere, harvesting resources couldn't identify. We could keep expanding, keep fighting, keep following the same path every species in the galaxy follows, or we could try something different. So you left, said. We corrected. There's a difference. We pulled back to our core systems and sealed the borders. We left automated defenses to keep everyone out, and we focused inward instead of outward. We decided to solve our own problems before we worried about the galaxy. What problems? Gestured at herself. Everything. We were divided, fighting among ourselves, destroying our own worlds. We had the technology to do amazing things, but we used it for war. So we changed. First, we unified. One government, one purpose. It took 50 years and almost started another civil war, but we did it. Then we started the metamorphosis. That word again. Had heard it several times now, always spoken with reverence. What is the metamorphosis? Smiled and held up her hand. Before could ask what she was doing, the human skin seemed to shimmer. Panels opened along her forearm, revealing circuitry and neural interfaces that were somehow integrated into her living tissue. Then they closed again, and her skin looked normal. We enhanced ourselves, said quietly. Biological modification, genetic optimization, cybernetic integration. We extended our to about 300 years. We improved our minds, our bodies, our senses. We made ourselves better. Leaned forward, his mandibles clicking with interest and horror. You modified your own genetics, integrated machines into your biology. This is forbidden by Concordat law. It leads to instability, to madness. For most species, yes, agreed. We lost a lot of people in the early trials. Took us almost a century to perfect the process. But we succeeded. Every human born in the last 200 years has these modifications. We're still human, still ourselves, but we're also more than we used to be. Thought about the implications. Every human was enhanced. Every human was a fusion of biology and technology. That meant every human was also a potential soldier, a potential genius, a potential threat. The metamorphosis wasn't just biological, continued. We changed our society too. We automated everything we could. Manufacturing, farming, basic services, all of it done by AI and robots now. That freed us to pursue what we wanted. Science, art, exploration, philosophy. We built a post-scarcity civilization. No one goes hungry. No one lacks medical care. Everyone has the freedom to become whatever they want. And what do they want? Asked. Smile turned sad. Most people want to create, to explore, to understand. But some people, they remember the Convergence War. They remember how close we came to losing. And they dedicated themselves to making sure we'd never be that vulnerable again. They became our military, our defenders. And over 300 years, they built something extraordinary. On the third day, they approached Earth. Had seen the recordings from 300 years ago. Earth had been polluted, crowded by centuries of industrial development. It had been dying. The planet below her now looked nothing like those recordings. Earth was green and blue and beautiful, its surface covered in forests and oceans, cities that blended seamlessly with nature. But it was the orbital infrastructure that made her forget to breathe. Rings, not one but dozens. Massive orbital rings that circled the planet at different altitudes, each one a city in its own right. Millions of people lived in those rings, explained. They chose to because the view was spectacular and the opportunities were endless. But beyond the rings, further out, saw the fleet. The real fleet, not the border patrol ships they'd seen at Gateway. The Terran Defense Fleet, humanity's real military power, and it was beyond anything she'd imagined. Thousands of ships, no, tens of thousands, dreadnoughts that dwarfed her flagship, carriers that could hold entire armies, destroyers that moved with impossible speed, and behind them in higher orbits she saw the shipyards, massive stations where new vessels were being constructed, their hulls taking shape in zero gravity. The Vindication, the ship that had destroyed the fleet at Threshold, would have been a small frigate in this fleet. Average, unremarkable. There were hundreds of ships larger and more powerful than it, just in the visible formations. Made a sound through the translator that had never heard from before. It took her a moment to recognize it. Terror. The hive mind was experiencing fear on a level that translated to physical sound. "This is impossible," the observer said, its crystalline form pulsing with agitation. "No single species could build this in 300 years. This represents industrial capacity beyond what the entire Concordat possesses combined." "We had time," said simply, "and we had focus, and we had the advantage of starting from scratch, building everything with our most advanced technology from the beginning. No legacy systems, no outdated infrastructure. Everything you see was built in the last 3 centuries using our best science and engineering." The shuttle descended toward Earth, landing at a facility outside a city identified as Geneva. When the door opened and they stepped out, felt Earth's gravity pull at her, familiar and strange at once. The air smelled of growing things, of life and renewal. A delegation waited for them. Humans in formal dress, their faces friendly but their eyes alert. Leading them was a woman who looked to be in her 60s, though whispered that she was actually almost 200 years old. Prime Minister, head of the Terran sovereignty. Ambassador Admiral said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. "Welcome to Earth. Thank you for accepting our invitation. I know this journey has been surprising for you. We have much to discuss." Took the offered hand, feeling the strength in that grip. "Prime Minister, thank you for receiving us. I confess I have more questions than I know how to ask." Smiled. "Then let's start with the most important one, the one you've been too polite to voice directly. What does humanity want? Why did we return after 300 years of silence?" She gestured for them to follow, leading them into a building that was somehow both ancient and modern. The walls displayed artwork from thousands of years of human history, but the technology embedded in every surface was cutting edge. They entered a conference room with windows overlooking Geneva and the mountains beyond. Invited them to sit, and refreshments were brought. Real food, not synthesized, prepared in ways that showed both art and care. When everyone was settled, began. 300 years ago, we fought the entire Concordat to a standstill. We could have won that war, Admiral. Our strategists developed 17 different plans that would have given us victory, but every one of those plans involved atrocities we couldn't accept. Biological weapons that would have sterilized entire planets, AI viruses that would have collapsed your economies, strategic strikes on civilian populations to break your will to fight. She paused, letting that sink in. We chose not to pursue those strategies. Instead, we agreed to a stalemate, a peace that satisfied no one but kept everyone alive. And then we left, not because we were afraid, not because we were defeated, but because we realized something crucial." "What?" asked quietly. "That we were becoming monsters," said simply. "We were so focused on winning, on expansion, on proving ourselves, that we were losing sight of what made us human. We were following the